Hey everyone, I'm Alex Montero with the Strong Town Chicago podcast, where we highlight the work that elected officials, educators, and activists are doing to make Chicago just a little bit better. Today, my guest is the alderman of the 47th Ward, Matt Martin, who, in addition to other reforms and efforts in City Hall, has been pushing for a change to the building code, allowing Single Stair to unlock compact infill missing middle development across more of the city. So without further ado, Alderman Matt Martin. Matt, thank you for joining us today.
So happy to be here.
Before we get into the specifics of Single Stair, you were elected alderman in 2019, re-elected in 2023. Prior to that, your background was law. You worked in the Illinois Attorney General's office, focused on issues around civil rights and immigration and police reform. What made you choose to run for office here in Chicago? What went behind that choice, and what was it that you were hoping to bring to the position and the job based on your previous experience?
Two big reasons why I ran. So one was I was fortunate enough to work with another neighbor to start up a neighbors association, Heart of Lincoln Square Neighbors. There had been a neighbors association there previously, but had kind of fallen apart over a long period of time. And I had the good fortune of working with my predecessor, Maya Pawar, and his team in helping breathe new life into what became the Heart of Lincoln Square Neighbors Association. And I just really came to appreciate the quiet but necessary work that aldermanic offices do in advising people and bringing people together in constructive ways, whether it's to say, hey, we're really concerned about X, or we are really excited about Y, or we just want to get to know our neighbors who might live more than a block or two away from us. And I wanted to be able to help continue to shape and grow an already dynamic community. And then I also simultaneously was deeply concerned about citywide issues and the ways in which city council needed to play a more prominent role in shaping the direction for our entire city to make. Historically, it was the case that, especially under the first Mayor Daley, but also into the second Mayor Daley, that the alder people on city council, we would be the mayors of our own little wards. And we would make decisions formally and informally about what businesses went in, what developments went in, park district improvements, the list goes on. But then we would cede authority to citywide issues for the mayor to take the lead on. And if ever there were differences, which invariably did arise, that would get worked out quietly behind closed doors, but you really did have this sort of bifurcated approach of hyperlocal issues versus city issues. But that started to break down over the last several decades, especially with the Shackman decree that helped usher out patronage politics in Chicago, which was a good thing. But there's still that muscle memory in place of the mayor's office often operates at the hub of Chicago government, leading those citywide conversations. And there's still an expectation that alder people focus exclusively on ward issues, even if you don't get to direct, like you could in the past, how garbage was collected or what streets would get plowed. And it really came home for me around the murder of Laquan McDonald. When that murder video was released, I was working at the Illinois Attorney General's office, or actually shortly thereafter, I went over to the office, and the office made the decision under then Attorney General Lisa Madigan to sue the city of Chicago to usher in a set of reforms that had been needed for several decades. And in doing that work, I came to appreciate the fact that since at least the early 1970s, there were high-profile shootings involving police officers. You would get a blue ribbon commission convened to talk about what needed to change, but the recommendations would just collect dust until the next shooting. And it really spoke to broader issues around how our public safety institutions were quite calcified, that they weren't modernizing in the ways that people needed. And that might manifest itself in people reaching out to an aldermanic office complaining about a robbery, a burglary, a carjacking, a shooting that happened. And you can talk about collaboration with the police department, with the state's attorney's office, other local organizations. But we need, in my opinion, city council, from a policymaking perspective, sitting more at the hub, like a lot of other legislative bodies do. So I thought that nice mix of hyperlocal issues, citywide issues, collapsing the difference between the two would be a recipe for fulfillment, for challenge, for opportunity. And I'm grateful that so many residents said, yeah, Matt, give it a try.
A lot of the issues that you've been focused on, especially on the side of ethics reform in City Hall, have been some of those systemic pieces and looking at what do we do in the wards versus what we do across the city. Are there any particular issues in the past 7 years or so that you've been in office that stand out as an opportunity for taking something that's currently done ward by ward, and if you have an alder person and their staff who aren't paying attention to it, you're kind of out of luck, that maybe could be done more systematically at the city level, and vice versa. Things that the city is doing where maybe local residents and local offices can have a little bit more say in shaping how those things work.
So on the first front, I would say actually about zoning and land use. I've been very fortunate to have terrific people working with my office and to have strong neighbors associations and chambers of commerce who generally share our vision around what it means to build more housing, more affordable housing, more commercial development all across the ward, but especially along our big commercial corridors, Ashland, Damon, Irving Park, Lincoln. And we've done a lot of zoning approvals to help bring more housing to the community. But we also found that increasingly it wasn't just a parcel or two on a street, but broad swaths of these large corridors that were primed for redevelopment as the needs of the community changed, as the housing stock changed, especially with conversions of 2 and 3 flats into single family homes. So fast forward to a few years ago, we worked closely with Alderman Vasquez, Alderwoman Maria Haddon, to proactively upzone broad swaths of Western Avenue. And then more recently, we did the same on Broadway with Alderwoman Clay and Alderwoman Hoppenworth. And I think that the city can and should explore more opportunities like that to, in a more gentle way, essentially update the zoning code and say, it's not really serving the needs of our communities right now. And if we can front load community engagement, working with departments to say, not just parcel by parcel, but block by block, mile by mile, here's what we want to see, then that provides a degree of predictability and stability for people who are current owners or prospective owners of property who want to improve them. So I'm really feeling good about that work. In terms of issues around maybe where we could see the inverse in terms of more local input and decision making, not that this hasn't happened at all, but it's happened more slowly than I would like, is around placemaking, specifically plazas, how you create open spaces. And on the one hand, I can appreciate the desire to include the Department of Planning and Development, the Department of Transportation, CTA, the Building Commission, but it does take, in my opinion, too long to build out these public spaces. And I would love to see us maybe work backwards from a set of goals to say every community area should have within a particular proximity a park, a library, a plaza, and give local decision makers, including but not limited to alder people, a little bit more leeway to make those decisions quickly so that people feel that when they engage government, they see good things happen and it doesn't have to take 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And one of the temporary ways people do that today is block parties, which you've been very vocal about encouraging people to submit applications for this summer.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit more about that and how that's a placemaking exercise for neighborhoods, and maybe how more Chicagoans who don't know that's an option can get together with some neighbors and do that?
Mm-hmm. It is a great way to bring together neighbors who maybe are new to the community and want to meet longer tenure neighbors, or maybe neighbors who are just really busy. Like say you're got a young family, I got a young family, I've got a 6-year-old and an 11-year-old. We're busy a lot, and we oftentimes don't just stop to check in with our neighbors. And especially if maybe you're not sitting on your stoop or your front porch with an opportunity to see people walking by, the day just goes by without you maybe seeing your neighbors for days, weeks, even months at a time. And so to have a block party is a way, especially during those summer months that are so special here in Chicago, to come together for a few hours and say, hey, let's all bring something. I'll bring a beverage. You bring a main dish. You bring a side. The city makes bouncy houses available, which is wonderful. And it's just a way to strengthen community, bring people together, which I don't think happens often enough here in Chicago. And also it helps people re-envision spaces too, because a lot of our streets understandably are geared towards cars, but that doesn't have to be the case. And in fact, that isn't the case if you think about street festivals and how special that is in the city of Chicago. So I think that doing that on a much smaller scale with block parties is a great and cost-efficient way of breathing additional life into our communities.
Mm-hmm. Now, for folks who aren't as familiar with the 47th Ward, because some of Chicago's wards are pretty oddly shaped, how would you describe where the 47th Ward sits and some of the characteristics across the ward, and how has that shaped your approach to being a representative for the people in the ward?
It is on the north side of Chicago, primarily the Lincoln Square, Ravenswood, and North Center communities. We have some bits of Uptown, Roscoe Village, Andersonville. If people aren't particularly familiar with the north side, I'd say, do you know where Wrigley Field is? More often than not, people will nod their heads and say, I don't represent Wrigley Field, but I'm about a half block due west of there. And then for folks who are like, I need some streets to help me out, it's primarily Addison up to Lawrence, and then Ashland over to Rockwell / the Chicago River. There are some exceptions with that, but that's the primary boundaries.
For transit nerds, you might say it's a brown line and a little bit red line neighborhood.
That's right. And Metro Ravenswood Station, which is one of the busiest in the system. And so that was going to be the second thing I say. One of the things that makes our community really strong and helps define it is access to quality public transit. We have the brown line bisecting us diagonally, busy Ravenswood Metro Station, and then a lot of high-frequency bus corridors, which is great. So especially over the last 20, 25 years, a lot of people have moved to and stayed in the community due to access to public transit to get you downtown or some other parts of the city. It's also a community with a lot of great schools, terrific libraries, Sulzer Library in particular, great park district facilities of varying sizes, your pocket parks all the way up to your truly terrific parks like Wells Park, Clark Park, Chase Park. So it is, I think, a place that is both family friendly, but also accommodating of people of all different backgrounds and household sizes. Increasingly, one of the things that I do think is a defining feature of the area in and around 47th Ward is how increasingly expensive it is to find and keep a home, and whether you rent or you own. And from my very first day, that has been one of our office's top priorities. How do we take an all of the above approach in terms of more market rate housing, more affordable housing, focusing on the interior of the community as well as commercial areas, and then increasingly looking beyond 47 to say, well, the characteristics of 47 aren't the same characteristics of downtown or North Lawndale or Roseland, and how can I help my colleagues whose constituents are feeling what my constituents are feeling in terms of that affordability pinch to bring more housing to their communities. So some of it's going to be different, right? We have very few city-owned lots here, so that doesn't give us a lot of opportunity, but we have done some great things, especially by the Western Brown Line Station, to build affordable housing, 100% affordable housing in our community. But I like to juxtapose that with, say, North Lawndale, which has many hundreds of city-owned vacant lots that pose different challenges but different opportunities when it comes to building more housing.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a perfect transition to the issue of Single Stair specifically. So for folks who aren't as familiar with Single Stair, it sounds something vaguely technical. It's part of the building code. It's a reform some other cities have done. Maybe they've seen some article about it, but it sounds very nerdy, very technical. Why does Single Stair matter to Chicagoans from the perspective of making it possible to bring more homes to the city?
Especially in a place like the 47th Ward, a lot of the newer buildings that get constructed are 4 to 6 stories, but especially 4 to 5 stories. And that is building height that is optimal for Single Stair, which essentially says we've got some outdated building codes that were based on when fires were much likelier to happen and much deadlier to happen. Thankfully, we have a lot of fire suppression technology, and we can think more creatively about how we continue to build, but we maximize the number of homes that can be in every building. And when I was doing some research canvassing with my former chief of staff, Josh Mark, just to say, we know we need to build more homes. What can we borrow from other cities and states that we aren't already doing? And one of the things that jumped to the top of the list was Single Stair, to say instead of having 2 stairwells, you can have a single one. You can do it in a way that still maintains an adequate amount of safety, and in doing so, bring down building costs, but also add additional homes, which in a rental building or a condo building will mean that you can make more money, and you're going to get more of these built, more homes built. And especially with these types of buildings, if it involves a change to the city's zoning code, it triggers what's called the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, which means that 20% of the homes, this is the approach we take, will need to be affordably priced on site. So that means that with these 4 or 5 story buildings, which are quite ubiquitous along our bigger streets in the 47th Ward, you can build more housing with the adoption of single stair, and by definition, build more affordable housing at the same time. So it really helps address our affordable housing challenges across 47.
Mm-hmm. You're able to enable buildings that have a mix of both market rate units and mandated affordable units.
That's right. And at the end of the day, given the fact that building costs are increasing, labor costs are increasing, property taxes are increasing, to be able to fit more homes within the existing building envelope, the drawings that someone creates, that means that it's just likelier to get more buildings built, because sometimes, and we've seen this happen, where we approve a new development and then costs go up in a way where someone says, hey, I just can't build it right now. And especially if they've torn down a building, we just wait for many years for something new to come in. This can help change the game in communities like 47, having more homes built, and sometimes homes built that otherwise wouldn't be built altogether.
Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of scale of buildings and lots where this is most useful? To a lot of people listening to this, I think they can imagine, oh no, someone's going to build a huge apartment building with just one stairway for hundreds of units. But the places that have adopted this have typically targeted a particular scale of building, right? Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, I think you're talking about maybe on a commercial stretch, two city lots. And
so
like
standard
I mentioned,
Chicago lot, 25 by 125.
That's right. And then 4 to 5 stories. So this is something that gets approved quite frequently in the 47th Ward and around the 47th Ward. I don't want to talk too broadly about other parts of the city that I'm not quite as conversant around, but whether you're in Lakeview or North Center, Ravenswood, Lincoln Square, Uptown, these types of buildings have already been built and they're continuing to be built. So I think in a lot of ways, these new buildings that could use single stair, put that to good use, are complementing our existing housing stock. They don't stick out like a sore thumb.
And talk a little bit about when you were doing research, what did you learn from other cities that have done this, and what results have showed up there? What are some good examples?
Yeah, I think so a place like New York has had this in place for a long period of time. And so the sky has not fallen, in short, when it comes to safety-related issues, administrability issues, when you're thinking about a Department of Buildings that has to go through and make sure that everything is looking as the plans and the city's building code requires. There are states like Texas that I think have really lifted a ban on single stair and allowed more jurisdictions to build along those lines. West Coast cities are increasingly doing this as well. And so it's kind of a sign of the times. It's where, thankfully, our safety technology is. And with both mid-sized cities as well as our true peer cities, we're increasingly looking like an outlier. And with the proposal that we have in City Council, I hope that we can find a way to forge a compromise where we can get the building department supportive, the fire department on board with this, and at the end of the day, most importantly, we're building more homes at a time when it's sorely needed.
The original ordinance you introduced in May of last year, it's been a year since it was first introduced. What are some of the conversations you've had with folks since then? Some of your colleagues potentially that have seen the value of this and have come on board, people who have some concerns and have created dialogue that way. What has that conversation looked like?
A lot of my colleagues feel like this is a common sense step that we need to take, and have been either excited to see this move forward, raising their hand and saying, what can I do to support this? Or just to say, yep, this is a no-brainer. Wake me when it's time to take a vote. Our conversations have focused a lot on the Department of Buildings in terms of, is this something that, what would it require to go about changing the building code? So a very technical approach. We've had a number of conversations with the fire department around safety-related considerations. One change that we've made is to say, initially the ordinance said this would apply for buildings up to 6 stories. Fire department said, hey, well, our ladder trucks can't comfortably get up to a 6-story. And so that could be a concern from a safety perspective. So I said, okay, well, what if we max this out at 5 stories so that that big ladder truck, to the extent it's needed, and hopefully it's never needed with any of these buildings, could access those top floors easily. So that was a change that we made in response to some very constructive feedback, some very helpful feedback. And then also we've been talking with organizations like Strong Towns as well as architects to make sure that, maybe taking that in reverse, the architects say, yeah, in practice this will work. It doesn't just sound good in theory, but in practice this will in fact bring about more homes.
This is something we could build.
Exactly. And then for Strong Towns, Abundant Housing, other organizations, to make sure that this isn't just my own pet project, but this reflects needs that are being acknowledged all across the city. And I think the best sorts of legislation are the sorts of legislation that are spearheaded using an inside-outside strategy. You have one or more people on city council, the mayor's office, leading on the inside, and then you have outside groups who are able to go to alder people who maybe have questions or reluctant and say, I am your constituent, I support this, here's why. Can we count on your support? And if not, what would need to change?
And looking at what this reform has potential to, what's some of the kind of development in homes and some of the outcomes that you hope this would bring to your ward and in other parts of the city?
So I think one is we just need more homes. We've seen a lot of, especially in our North Center community, deconversions of 2 and 3 flats into single family homes. And it's tough for us to keep pace with that when it comes to new construction on our larger streets, Irving Park, Ashland, and Western in particular. So to just have a tool that allows us to bring more homes to the community in general is good, because we've lost a lot of them. Even if we've stayed relatively steady with population because we have more young families moving in, replacing, say, a single person and a childless couple, we still know we need more homes. Also, it gives architects and people in the development community more flexibility in terms of how they design the buildings themselves. From what we've been told, it might unlock some opportunities to build more family-sized homes in these buildings, your 2 and 3 bedrooms. Because right now, when you have those 2 staircases, especially if they're on either end of a building, logistically, it's most efficient to just do studios in ones, which we're happy to have those. But we also know that, especially when you look back to those deconverted homes, those were 2 and 3 bedroom units that families could live in quite comfortably. And if we have great schools here, if we've got great access to transportation, if we have great parks, we want to make sure that that's available to people of all different family sizes as well as different income backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. And some of the space savings of not having to run a corridor, especially in smaller buildings, and 2 staircases could potentially go into an extra bedroom or 2 for some units.
More homes and larger homes.
What is some of the hesitation that you've heard from some of the folks who are most concerned about this? You've mentioned CFD, Chicago Fire Department, and DOB, Chicago Department of Buildings. What are some of the concerns you've had from those folks, and what are ways that you and your office and some of the people working on this have tried to address those?
So some of it has involved the fire department saying, well, here are our logistics in terms of when we have a serious fire, how we respond to them. And so when I mentioned earlier, bringing down that top threshold of stories from 6 to 5 was to respond to the available vehicles for fire department personnel when it comes to combating fires. We've also talked with them about how the stairwells need to be designed, how they're used currently in terms of how people enter and exit the building, both as people who maybe are residents in the building who need to leave, as well as fire personnel who need to come in. So it's also something where anytime you're changing something that's as significant as the way that a building is designed, there can just be change that people have to wrap their heads around, period. You might be accustomed to a particular way of battling a fire with a building that's designed with 2 staircases, and there are going to be some changes that are needed with one. But my hope and expectation is that with new building materials, new fire suppression technology, the frequency of fires itself will continue to go down based on those advancements, and that we're not going to have to, in fact, have tough trade-offs between safety, and more homes, that we can figure stuff out together. And that's what we're seeing other cities do across the country.
Yeah. You've mentioned technology and the role of that. A lot of the building codes and the standards, like 2 exits for all buildings, regardless of size and how many units are in there, those go back to before there were really sprinklers or fire alarms,
That's right.
So introducing those things, the ordinance would require both of those elements, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And look, those are things that we've seen other jurisdictions adopt as well. So I always want to make sure that we can get any stakeholder comfortable with the proposal that we have, whether it's something along these lines or infrastructure ordinances that we've passed, environmental ordinances, the list goes on. Like, I want to work with people. I want to get people to a yes, but it's also important to feel that you're hearing the same from others who have questions or concerns. So I think we're getting there. We've had good, productive conversations, but we're also getting to the end of the term, and we have our August recess coming up in a few months. That's typically the 1 month out of the year where city council committees and the full city council, we don't meet. And then once we get into the fall, it's our normal budget season, which increasingly is taking up a lot of time, as it should, because our budgets are in a very complicated place. And then we have, of course, our election season. And so I think especially budget plus elections means we're going to really want to focus our time between now and the end of July on workshopping this proposal so that we can move it as quickly as possible.
There is a subject matter hearing coming up on Single Stair. What are some of the things that you would like your colleagues who are in the Zoning and Landmarks and Building Committee that will hear this to know and to think about as they go through and hear the proposal, listen to the technical elements, hear testimony from experts?
I think it's important first that they understand what we're looking to address here. And it's, how do we build more homes? How do we build more affordable homes? How do we build more family-sized homes? That two, this is something that isn't theoretical, but is being done successfully in other parts of the country. And we're not an exception here. There isn't something that's unique to Chicago geography or what's underneath the ground such that you would say, oh, that, yeah, it might work in New York or Seattle or LA or Austin, but it can't work here. That people should hopefully come out of that hearing saying, yeah, this is something that's common sense that we can adopt here. I want people also thinking that we are sensitive to safety concerns and that we're working with our key stakeholders, especially the fire department, to work through their issues. And I also want people to feel a sense of urgency around this, to say with each new development that gets approved that could use this but doesn't, that we're losing the opportunity to house more families, house more people across Chicago, and that there is a sense of urgency around getting this done in a timely and transparent way.
You'd mentioned zoning earlier and the role that zoning corridors, changing zoning in neighborhoods plays for adding housing. How do you see this ordinance interacting with some of those areas where potentially there is capacity, but it hasn't been practical to build it until something like this comes along?
Yeah, I think that especially along a street like Western, this could help a building pencil out, make financial sense when otherwise it wouldn't. I think in particular about some parts of Western that are further away from the Western Brown Line station, where despite being along the Western Avenue bus corridor, that there's still some apprehension from developers to say, oh, well, we're going to build large residential buildings along that corridor, as opposed to continuing to focus on it from a commercial perspective, especially single-use commercial with big parking lots that just aren't the highest and best use of that corridor anymore. So and what we're hearing from developers anecdotally is that this could be very impactful. We did the rezoning change, proactively upzoned all of Western Avenue, but we're not seeing an avalanche of development interest. We've seen some interest, but I want to see that increase. And so if we can give people more of an incentive and opportunity to build new homes, I think that's a good thing on balance. And I think that this is a modest but meaningful way to get more housing, not just along Western, but across the city.
A lot of folks say, well, why can't we just have your tower neighborhoods, which are your River Norths and your West Loops and parts of downtown and so on, and then everywhere else we just have 2 flats or single family homes and that's it? Why do we need these buildings that are straddle that space between, say, 6 and 20 units? Why do those matter?
It's a really important question. I think One is around just ensuring that our public spaces are used by as many people as possible. I think it should be the case that all of our parks, especially on warm days like today, and our upcoming summer months, I want those to be full with people. I want people to use those swimming pools to be playing baseball and softball. I want people to use pickleball courts and tennis courts. And part of how we make sure that that happens is by having a lot of people who can live within a short walking distance to take advantage of that. I think about our public transit system and how that in so many ways is the backbone of our city. Ridership isn't where we need it to be, even though it's continuing to go up. This is a way to do transit-oriented development in a thoughtful way that unlocks additional housing opportunities across the 47th Ward, the north side of the city of Chicago. At the end of the day, we know that we have the sad legacy of exclusionary zoning, exclusionary housing policies, redlining, block busting, and restrictive covenants. And I think about, as a Black man, a number of decades ago, I wouldn't have been able to purchase the home that I live in today. And I'm glad that that's no longer the case, but we're still living with that legacy. And so, look, I think that we should have a diverse housing stock. I think that we should have taller buildings. We should have mid-rise buildings. We should have larger walk-ups, 2 flats. We should have single-family homes. It shouldn't be any one of those things everywhere, because especially as we're seeing increasingly in places like Lincoln Square and North Center, that means that you're crowding out a lot of the diverse population that has long made our community special, and that you're just getting 1 or 2 types of families moving in, of households moving in. I don't think that's right. I don't think that sort of diversity and inclusion that it can continue to exist without a diverse housing stock that reflects that. I think most of the people in my community agree, but part of the challenge that I'll continue to have is to translate those goals and those values into workable policies that can engender a lot of support. Because one thing that I am very sensitive to is not making a series of decisions that prompts a backlash, such that when I leave office, the person who comes in works to undo that. Or in other parts of the city, they say, oh, we can't do what happened in 47 because did you see how people got really upset? So I think we have a good track record of, in the development context, building more homes, different types of homes, but bringing the community alongside us.
For Single Stair specifically, you introduced your ordinance a year ago. A few months ago, the governor's build plan was announced, including different reforms around permitting and zoning, and it included Single Stair as a provision in it. What are the differences between the ordinance you've proposed and that you're working on and the legalization at the state level, and how do those two things interact right now?
So I can't get into too many specifics in terms of the differences, because candidly, I've been less in the weeds in terms of exactly what the governor has proposed with Single Stair. I've kept in touch with the House and Senate sponsors to see where that is going, and in particular, what sort of pushback they're getting that we should be aware of. But at the end of the day, I've been a little bit more focused on just getting ours across the finish line. And just like with other policies around building, I think they are proposing in their Build Act 4 flats by right, and some other aspects to say, okay, well, I'm not as conversant with the state legislation that's been proposed as the city legislation, but it is heartening that someone who I very much admire and respect in Governor Pritzker and his senior team are working on parallel tracks with policies that we've been pursuing. And so to me, that indicates that we're on the right path. And even if they can't get all aspects of the Build Act done by the end of the month, when the legislative term ends down there, that we can kind of pick up where they left off and show that there's a real appetite for this sort of approach in Chicago.
For people who are hearing this podcast, listening to this podcast, who have heard about this and say, cool, I think Single Stair is awesome. I would love to see it come to Chicago. I would love to enable more middle housing in more neighborhoods. I don't know what I can do because I'm not an architect and I'm not a politician and I'm not on city council. What would you encourage them to do over the course of the next couple of months when this is being discussed as an ordinance?
First is, if they live in Chicago, reach out to your alderperson. put it on their radar. There's a lot of times on city council where there's so much legislation that's being considered and voted on that people will say, unless I sit on the committee where an item is being discussed, wake me when it's time to vote on it. We kind of take a divide and conquer approach, for better or for worse. So even if your alderperson isn't a member of the zoning committee that this item is going to get heard in, still reach out to them, because even if someone says, hey, I had like 5 or 10 people who randomly reached out to me about this policy, what's going on? Like, usually people reach out when they're really upset about something, and to have people conversely say, I really want to see this thing happen and I'm excited about it. What can you do? What's your position? Or even just like keep an eye on this. I think that's a really good thing. So reach out to your alderperson. We've got the committee hearing that's coming up. Submit some public comment if in writing, if that's going to be the easiest. But I think especially if you can sign up to come in person or to do virtual, which a lot of people don't know that virtual is an option, please do so, because that's another way, especially if you have a personal experience where you feel like personally or professionally, here's a reason why I think city council should move forward with this. Those sorts of testimonials are very impactful. And lastly, reach out to my office, reach out to Strong Towns, reach out to Abundant Housing Illinois or other organizations who have already shown themselves to be leaders on this issue and want to see this happen, because sometimes people will be surprised that there are more opportunities for them to advocate successfully than they think is currently available.
To close out, going into the summer season, right now, we've earned it, we've deserved it, we've come out of a long winter. Summer's coming up in Chicago. And you talked a little bit about some of the opportunities you hope people in your ward will take advantage of. What's something that you're looking forward to coming out in the next few months that you hope people will take advantage of and your office is trying to encourage people to do?
So we have an upcoming, our annual sustainability festival called EcoFest. It's going to be at Wells Park. And I'm really, really excited for that. So we have over 40 vendors, nonprofit organizations, both advocates as well as places that look to tune up your bikes, teach you how to plant gardens at home, advocate around policies like this, as well as sustainability initiatives. So that's one you should be on the lookout for. We're also working on creating a new public plaza in our North Center community across the street from Martyrs on Lincoln Avenue. So we've got some plans that are mostly baked, not fully baked. And once they are close to fully baked, we'll bring it to the community to get some additional input before we lock that in. But that's one that I'm really excited for. And then lastly, if anyone's been around over the last year or two, the Western Avenue Brown Line area, there's been a lot of construction. And that's especially the outside components largely coming to a close. I was there actually earlier this afternoon at the semi-weekly farmers market, and swing by that area, because whether you drive, you walk, or you bike, it's a much more inviting area. And it's one of the places where I'm most proud of when I think about why I ran and what we've been able to accomplish since then. We're in the midst of historic improvements to the station itself. The plaza outside of there is completely new. We've got pavers, we've got seating, we've got planters, we've got a nice flex space that could be parking some days, a farmer's market like is the case today. We have a protected bike lane, and then across the street from the station itself is a 6-story building with 100% affordable homes, 63 in total, with a restaurant space on the first floor. So the dust is mostly settling, and I think it's going to be something that people can enjoy and really say, this is that bridge from past to future. This was an area that was special for many decades, heart of Lincoln Square, and then to say, how can we, what does an ideal 15-minute neighborhood look like in Chicago where you can live, work, and play within a 15-minute walk? Go to the Western Avenue Brown Line station, and you're seeing that formed in real time.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alderman Martin, for meeting with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.